Hello YouTube, welcome back to the channel. So I wanted to do a video like this, do a little bit of a screen share thing, along with a little bit of a video playback. So we'll kind of combine the two elements. A couple of issues that I wanted to talk about. First, this one, which is kind of the follow-up to the original Panini suing Fanatics video that I had made earlier, is that now, as of a couple of days ago, Fanatics is filing a countersuit against Panini. So like I talked about in the original video a couple of days back, it was a case where it made a lot of sense from Panini's perspective to try to stem the tide of a lot of the stuff that Fanatics was doing. Fanatics is operating very aggressively, and it's a good way to kind of push back. And I also talked about the snarky comment, the commentary that Fanatics had in response to the actual lawsuit, and also some information about Paul Lesko breaking down some elements of the lawsuit. But here it is, 5 days later, and I will link this article to you from Sports Collectors Daily, breaks down some of the items from the countersuit. And of course, you can always follow Paul Lesko, who's already done a full breakdown on it as well. I didn't specifically go to Lesko on this one, so I'm just going to focus on this one, but I'll include a link to this if you want to skim through the whole thing and get a little bit of a synopsis. Now, following the original lawsuit, the antitrust lawsuit was 56 pages, but now Panini has served a 96-page countersuit. So, and as part of that, they've also talked about some elements of it which describe in a little bit more detail some of what they allege that Panini has done as far as acting in bad faith, but also specifically talking about the fact that Panini was trying to make some moves towards potentially selling. However, specifically, and I want to focus on one or two specific things. If I scroll down a little bit past, and as I said, you'll have a link to the article, so you'll be able to scroll through a lot of it. In their countersuit, Fanatics includes information like not only is the lawsuit littered with factual inaccuracies, which of course, is going to include in the countersuit, but Panini's own licensing practices and experience as the long-standing incumbent presiding over multiple overlapping exclusive licenses with players' associations and leagues give the lie to any allegations that is now an antitrust victim, which is kind of one of the points that we made in the first video, is that it's kind of tough to argue antitrust because of long-term exclusives when Panini has been the beneficiary of some long-term exclusives. And that's something we talked about in the live stream, where it's like a lot of people really don't feel too bad for them, especially given that Panini has exercised a lot of the same leverage when they had the exclusive, and currently they still have it for now, but obviously they're a lame duck with Fanatics taking over. However, one of the key pieces that came out of the countersuit here is, as Sports Collectors Daily outlines, unbeknownst to most collectors, the two sides have been talking a lot over the past 18 months about a potential deal that would give Panini's NBA and NFL licenses to Fanatics early, but relations have now significantly deteriorated. And now I'm going to go from the quote. Panini has been treating us with the lawsuit for months, using it as leverage to threatening us with this lawsuit for months, using it as leverage to try to make us do a bad deal based on falsified profits, which is another thing that was included in the countersuit. But specifically moving forward, it's included that Fanatics revealed that it had begun discussion with Panini in February of 2022 about a deal that would have ended Panini's licenses early in exchange for a cash payout. Now, this is really important because obviously when we saw a little bit of smoke last year, one of the things that was the point of contention is, does that mean Panini sells out the business? Do they spin off Panini America? And there was a lot of different scenarios that were kind of in play. However, the key here is that the deal that was outlined in the countersuit here is about getting the licenses, because that's really the part that Fanatics cares about the most. It's the licenses. Now that they have Topps, they have access to those IP as far as Topps is concerned. Yeah, I'm sure that Prism, Select, National Treasures, and a variety of those other different brands would be of some interest, but it's one of those things where the actual bottom line, the most important piece of the puzzle for them, is the actual licenses. If they can get the licenses early, then they can create the licensed cards, and I'm going to talk a little bit about unlicensed here in a minute. It's the second half of kind of this video conversation, but the bottom line is that, talking about what this countersuit is breaking down, is that the main focus of Fanatics was to get the licenses. It wasn't necessarily to buy Panini America or even anything else related to Panini specifically outside of the actual licenses themselves. Anything that came beyond that would have been like bonus. It would have been icing on the cake. But as they allege in the countersuit, is that would have allowed them to accelerate their plans. But Fanatics says that Panini dragged out the final details and submitting earnings projections that were inflated by 30%, translating to an unreasonably high early termination fee. And then a lot of information gets thrown related to Panini CEO Mark Wassop admitted to as much during meetings, and but Fanatics said it lost tens of millions of dollars in attorney's fees and other expenses as a result of the deal that never happened. Now, there's some more about the CEO of Panini here that makes it very interesting. I may talk a little bit more about it in the live stream, but it is here. If you want to skim through this article, it does cover some of those high-level points. It is kind of a fun breakdown, but I'm not a lawyer, so I don't really want to spend too much time in the particulars of it. But we are in the phase of kind of the mudslinging through lawsuits, which is kind of fun. As an observer, it is kind of entertaining. But as I kind of emphasized during the live stream and some of the other discussions as well, this isn't going to be a quick thing necessarily, unless there is like a major smoking gun, even beyond what we've already seen. I think these two sides are kind of going to kind of fight back and forth with each other and drag it out a little bit. It's going to require some big move to force a little bit more of an action sooner rather than later, but it is a step in the process of getting us towards wherever we're going to end up as far as where the licenses are going to be. We know that in the long run, Fanatics is going to have access to it, but the question is what that world is going to look like and how far down the road that is actually going to take place. So I think that's going to be one of the key pieces. As I said, I'll include a link to this article for you if you want to read through it and check out some of the stuff. It is very well summarized here from Sports Collectors Daily, so thank you to them for doing a nice breakdown and covering a lot of the elements, which I'm sure we'll have some more time during the live stream on Friday to discuss at some more length. Now, sorry, quick editing cut here. I did see one more thing that I quickly wanted to touch on, since it was something that we had discussed a little bit in the previous video and also on the live stream pertaining to Fanatics' ownership over one of the printing facilities, and that's the key piece here. So I'll include here, in the suit, Fanatics attempts to counter Panini's claims that Fanatics bought the company that makes Panini's cards, making it harder to produce products and get them to collectors. That's one of the things we discussed a little bit and speculated on. Fanatics claims that Panini has become the problem for GCP, so they're putting it back on Panini. They claim Panini has been slow to deliver production files, autographs, and memorabilia to GCP on time, as capacity that's reserved and not used is lost, and resulting in GCP recently in 2023 missing its budget and profit goals by tens of millions of dollars. So it's a lot of the back and forth saying, well, it's your fault, you're the reason why. No, it's your fault, you're the reason why. As I said, it's going to be a lot of back and forth. For the lawyers amongst us, this is probably a fascinating, tennis match as the two different sets of lawyers kind of fight with each other. But as I said, we'll come back to it and talk a little bit more about it a little bit more at length. But for the rank and file collectors, I don't think we're going to see too much movement out of this. Maybe some more lawsuits and some more pieces will come out as far as this is concerned, but it'll be interesting for us to watch if nothing else. Now, next up, I wanted to talk a little bit about unlicensed cards. And specifically, I'm going to bring your attention to a video from about a week ago on the Geoff Wilson show, where he was kind of interviewing and talking and having a discussion with Brian Gray of Leaf Trading Cards. And as always, Brian Gray is a very interesting dude as far as a lot of the conversations he has and a lot of the opinions. He's got opinions. If nothing else, you can get a lot of entertainment value out of a lot of his takes. Now, you may not agree with all of his takes, but it's one of those things, it's hard to argue that he keeps things interesting, if nothing else. We can definitely say that for certain. Now, going into this conversation, they talk predominantly about the National for about the first 15 minutes or so of this conversation. So I'm going to skip ahead maybe to about minute 16 here. I think I've got it queued up almost to the right spot. I want to let it play a little bit and let Brian Gray talk a little bit about unlicensed cards and kind of what Leaf does on their side of things. And then I want to add a couple of comments and then share a couple of cards that I bought recently that I think play a little bit into this. Now, I want to preface this all by saying, I'm not really here to try to convince you about unlicensed cards, because at the end of the day, as a collector, you need to figure out what makes sense for your collection, what you like, what you prefer. For a lot of folks, unlicensed cards are a non-starter to begin with, but there are some interesting conversations and points that get made about the unlicensed cards. And actually, I'll probably include a video link in the description as well to a recent video from Dakota, Sports Cards Anonymous, where he actually did a little bit of a background, a little bit of a history on football cards, because a lot of folks don't know that for a stretch of time there, Topps was actually producing football cards technically unlicensed or not fully licensed. And that's kind of an important distinction, because when we're talking about sports cards, we can have a players league license or a players association license and then a league license. One of them is for the name and likeness of the individual players, and one of them is for the logos and team nicknames and things of that sort. And if you want to kind of see what the difference looks like, we can talk about our friends Panini here. Go to their current baseball products. They have a license for the players association, so they can say, Ronald Acuna, Atlanta, but they can't say Ronald Acuna Atlanta Braves and then throw in the logo as part of it. So there is a difference. There is a difference between one version of what it looks like and another, as opposed to having both pieces of it. And Dakota does a good job separating, because Fleer had access to the logos, and then Topps had access to be able to show the player's name and likeness, and it created two very different kind of products, even though both licenses were in play at the time, but separately from each other. Now, with that said, let me let Brian Gray here talk for a little bit and talk about unlicensed, and then I'll come back and talk about that a little bit myself and show a couple of examples. And we'll see, like I said, down the road, and this becomes pertinent again because of the lawsuit piece that I talked about in the first part. Because if Topps wants to come into the game, they don't necessarily have the ability to create licensed cards right now, because they simply don't have access to that license. That's what the whole deal with Panini was going to be about. But there are things they can do, and Leaf has already demonstrated a model at which there are ways to get around it a little bit. Now, it's going to be interesting to see what in the long run that ends up looking like if we end up with some kind of a Topps unlicensed thing coming in the next year or two, until such time that they get access to the licenses. And if Panini loses those licenses, when they do, what do they do? Do they actually keep producing products? Do they borrow kind of a Leaf style model. That's why I say this becomes a little bit more pertinent, a little bit more interesting now, given the current state of where the licenses are and where they're potentially going to go, and because we still have these two companies that are kind of vying for what the future of that segment of sports cards is going to look like. May as well refer here to Brian Gray, who's already operating in one of those spaces without the licenses.
Creative, prove people wrong, and that sometimes you have to be a bold visionary and just do it.
Yeah.
And people may not like it, but you'll learn.
Yeah.
They may not like unlicensed, but more and more people are looking and saying, oh crap, my 1981 Joe Montana rookie card is not licensed. People don't realize Topps didn't have a license. My Staubach rookie, my Bradshaw rookie, my Dorsett rookie. All of those cards are unlicensed. And when Panini loses the licenses in 2 years, you think people are going to quit buying Flawless and Immaculate and Treasures? No, they're going to buy them unlicensed. And once they start buying those brands unlicensed, that mindset's going to change. So I decided 10 years ago to be way ahead of the curve and make unlicensed high quality, because there will be a day where people change their collecting habits. They're going to change. Same thing with this show. You've got to be bold and visionary and put it out there. And when you do that, and you're right, it will work out even if the public doesn't realize you're right. And I think it's time for someone to take on the established cookie cutter, because I don't want to live in a cookie cutter world.
Yeah.
I want to live in this bold world change that we're experiencing everywhere outside this building. All the bets are off and all the rules are changing. But in this building, we're not ready to embrace change, and it's time.
Now, I'm going to pause here for just a second because I wanted to make sure that we got Brian's synopsis here. Now, of course, I want to be clear. This synopsis is a little bit self-serving, given that he has a company that produces these unlicensed cards, and he kind of spun the narrative. He gave the story. Now, there might be a lot of truth to it. It might have been a conscious decision on his part to not really pursue those licenses for Leaf that specific way. Or it could have been because he has talked about in other interviews that it is also a cost consideration, because getting these licenses and bidding for them costs a lot of money. Obviously, Fanatics threw a gigantic deal, not necessarily a cash deal, but an equity deal at the sports leagues in order to get access to these licenses and turn Panini into a lame duck in the NBA as well as the NFL. But the key is, there's still money involved, one way or the other, however you want to spin it, either as an equity deal or as a cash deal. So Leaf may not necessarily have been in a position or had wanted to fork over the kind of money that would have been required to try to pitch it. And the leagues seem very inclined to have an exclusive licensee rather than deal with multiple licenses. That's another scenario that could play down the road here if they end up creating little sub-licenses and allowing some of these other brands to have a smaller scaled down presence and create a little bit of competition in the space. I wouldn't hold my breath, but I wanted to make sure I got Brian's thesis in here, because for him, obviously, he's going to present this in the, oh yeah, well, consumer habits are going to change. I don't know if that's necessarily going to be the case. That is possible, though, and I am going to make a little bit of a pitch for, as a collector, it does create the possibility of some very interesting cards or some good value. That might be another way I would present it to you. And he also made the point about the Joe Montana rookie being, quote-unquote, unlicensed, kind of for the reason that I outlined a little bit earlier. So it's one of those things where he's not completely wrong, but bear in mind, he does have a little bias, and his argument is a little bit self-serving in the sense that he literally operates a company in the space that kind of operates in that licensing structure, which is to say they don't have licenses. Therefore, they have to kind of strike individual deals with athletes to get autographs and be able to showcase some of their stuff, and they cannot show logos. Now, Brian Gray has also made some allegations about things that you can do with that. He's got his theory regarding some case law. If you ever want to see an amateur lawyer in the space, as opposed to a Paul Lesko who's a lawyer, if you want to see the amateur lawyer in the space, Brian Gray is probably your guy that definitely has some definite legal theories. So let me let this play a little bit more, and then we'll come back and, like I said, I'll show some examples and talk through my piece as well. Now, with the power editing, I'm going to skip a little bit ahead further in the conversation. This is maybe about the 26-minute mark, so you can see on the screen there, 26:14. So I'm going to skip ahead. We're going to come back around to the unlicensed discussion of unlicensed cards, and I'll let Brian Gray and Geoff go back and forth a little bit on this, and then I'll conclude with a couple of points, and I'll show a card and give an example, and we'll talk a little bit about that piece, because as I said, I think it'll become more pertinent as we go along, but it's one of those things we'll have to see how it plays out. But it is interesting to at least discuss this a little bit for now, and then we'll see how that ends up looking like and how consumers receive it. But let's get Brian Gray's take on this piece with this follow-up section of the conversation.
Oh, I definitely hope so. So you've got it now on the topic of Leaf, unlicensed cards. Let's go there for a minute. Tell me, the audience is probably generally familiar with your products, but make the case for unlicensed cards, because you've said, you're right, at times on the Sports Card Investor channel, I wouldn't say we've been critical of it. I don't think we're critical of it,
fans.
But we're not huge fans of it, and I'll speak honestly to it. From an investment standpoint, I tend to look at licensed products. I tend to want licensed products, right? From a collector standpoint, I think there can be a lot of value in unlicensed.
Sure.
You bring lower price points often for products, people get more out of a Leaf box than they get out of any other type of box because you don't have to pay for the licensing. So you can put more autos in there, you can put more interesting cards, you can put more numbered parallels, you don't have to pay for the licensing, so you can produce it at a lower price point, and so that gets passed on to the consumer with a way of more stuff, which in many cases is good. But what do you think, like, what do you think is the argument for why unlicensed will continue to grow in popularity and really be, up there with licensed in terms of importance in the trading card world?
I mean, what I can tell you, because I know this for a fact, the growth in sales and profitability for the companies in the unlicensed space far exceeds the 3 biggest companies in the business. Our sales increase and our EBITDA the last 4 years, we blow these guys away in terms of growth. No brainer. That's because there's changing consumer behavior. The case for player license, I actually don't call it unlicensed. It's player license. Yeah. Unlicensed, when you go on eBay and you see a card someone made in their garage,
right, that they
without
had
the player's
no right
permission,
to do.
They put the logo on there without permission, whatever it is. We make player license. Every person we make cards up, with the exception of some of our newsflash cards, which are First Amendment driven and fair use, those things. All of our products that are packaged are player licensed. So, no different than Panini baseball.
Yeah, right. So you have the permission from the player to put them on a card, but you don't have the permission from the team. You don't have the logo or the sports league, right?
Legally, I will say we may not have to have their permission. We may be allowed to do that without their permission. And Upper Deck had a great legal case. We're not a legal show, but Upper Deck had a great legal case that outlined why. But we try to cooperate and be friendly and not ruffle feathers any more than we have to. We try to ruffle minimal feathers. But the case for player license is a couple. Number one, if you're buying sealed products, no brainer. The ROI or the return when you open a box from a value only standpoint is double or triple a licensed product. That's just what it is.
Yeah.
You don't have to like that. It's a fact. We can go open 100 grand worth of Leaf and 100 grand worth of any other company, and you will have more money when you sell my cards than when you sell the others. It's a fact. But it's not just about money. If you collect autographs, you're getting the ink of the best players in the world. We have many players other companies can't get. You may have noticed there's no Giannis autographs in Panini, but I got them. There's no Jaw autographs. They have them exclusive. There's no autographs in their product. I've got them. There's a lot of players that I get that no one else can get. There's celebrities I get that no one's ever going to get. I just signed Clint Eastwood. I mean, no one's getting these people to sign. Britney Spears, J-Lo, Donald Trump. Like, no one's getting these people to sign. I get them to sign. So clearly, we're offering a collector / someone who wants to see the product itself. Forget investment for a second. Clearly, we provide a value that's extraordinary. Number two, if you're a pure investor, not a card collector, I think about it like I think of, when I say high priced, I'm not talking about overall valuation. I'm talking about the actual price of the stock. There are guys that love buying these stocks that are $1,200, $1,500 a share because of the way they behave. And there's also guys that love buying $5 stocks because of the way they behave. Shohei Ohtani, 2018 Leaf Trinity autograph. Number to 25 sold on, or number to 5 sold on pre-war 6 weeks ago for $8,000. That is a player licensed, showing him in his Japanese jersey, card from Leaf that sold for $8,000. We've had Mahomes sell for $5,000, $10,000. This isn't like the old days. This isn't press pass wildcard stage like these other companies. Like, our products are treated like licensed products in many respects. So what I would argue is, if you can't see, and what's funny is you look at a lot of licensed cards, you still can't see the logo.
Right.
Depending on the way the player's facing or standing at the plate, when he's got his hands across his chest to bat, half the time you can't even see the logos anyway.
Right.
So honestly, what is that card different from my card for?
Right.
I can put the city name on the front or the team name on the front. It's descriptive. So, like, I think we've just been brainwashed into thinking licensed. And again, I would argue that most wise investors have figured out that when the mobs are fighting over assets is the time you should be a supplier of the asset, not a consumer of the asset. Mm-hmm. You should be looking for out of favor, not out of favor for a good reason, but out of favor for a reason that doesn't make a lot of sense or just it's being ignored.
So I'm going to use a little bit of editing magic here. We're going to pause, and because Brian Gray goes on for a little while, and there was a couple of points he made there. One of them was pertaining to the, he talks about the case where he believes that they can actually put logos on it. That's the infamous red button discussion that I joke about on the live stream because Brian Gray has been making this pitch. Now, he mentioned Upper Deck. I actually think it was Pacific that he originally used as a discussion point on it. It might have been Upper Deck, but I think it was Pacific that about why they had a case where he felt it. And I think his argument has been about work uniforms. That's been kind of the context of it. But I'm not going to get too deep into that, but it's one of those things where it'd be very interesting if he actually did decide to challenge it, but he was also saying he's playing nice. But he did make one point there related to how sometimes the license cards, depending on the angle and the direction of the image, can show the player in a way where you're still not seeing the logo. So it's a situation where effectively the card itself, even though it's fully licensed, doesn't look in any way, shape, or form different from quote unquote the unlicensed card, but at the same time, you're getting a much better value. So now is where I'm going to get into the section where I'm going to flip over to an image of a card, and then I'll share with you an example of a card that sold on eBay not long ago that kind of conveys this very well. It's actually a good example of this specific thing that Brian Gray is talking about. So I'm going to use a Leaf card 2 times, and for one of them, I'll actually show you a Select card that actually is a good comparable to the concept, not necessarily which card somebody might want more, but the concept itself. So let me use a little bit of editing magic here, and I'll come back and I'll show you. Okay, so we're back, and I'm going to show you this Joe Montana autograph card. Now, what's interesting about this is that, as I said, this is a Leaf card. So this is a Leaf metal card. It is this So Money is the name of the insert set here they came up with. Now, it's one of those things with a lot of these Leaf products, there's not really a lot of base cards. They basically come out with cards like this. Now, it's Joe Montana in his San Francisco 49ers uniform, but as you can see from the angle that we're looking at the image, we're looking at Joe Montana almost straight on because you've got the zoomed in version and you've got the picture of him with the football. But if you look at the uniform of San Francisco 49ers, for the most part, it looks like a San Francisco 49ers uniform. And as far as the helmet is concerned, since you're looking at him straight on, you don't see the 49er logo on the uniform. This is a situation where you don't have to do any photoshopping or airbrushing. You don't really have to do anything crazy in order to kind of avoid a lot of the naming conventions. You just put his name on the front. You don't have to put the team name anywhere, and you can pretty much roll with it. Now, you've got this card. This particular variant is numbered to 5, and it is a sticker autograph. So it's really important that we include those pieces of it because it's going to be pertinent to the example I'm about to give you. Now, I can tell you that this card is one that I've purchased and is going to be on its way to me. And the card itself, like I said, was numbered to 5, and I got it for $40. Best offer. Probably I could have tried to push them a little bit to bring it down a little bit more, but overall $40, I'm pretty happy with it. I'm not going to grab too many Joe Montana cards, but I just thought it was a nice looking card, and for a nice autograph of Joe Montana, I thought $40 is reasonable. It is possible to get some of those Leaf autographs even cheaper. I've seen some as low as like 25 bucks. So you got to think, Joe Montana autograph like 25, 30, or even 40 bucks, that's pretty cheap. Not a bad deal depending on what you're looking for. And there's a variety of different designs. Some of them are more appealing, some of them are less appealing. That's why I want to be key about it. Thinking as a collector, this design I thought looked pretty nice. I think it's going to be interesting. And when I get it in hand, I'll show it off a little bit. It looks like there's a lot of shine potentially on this card. So I think it'd be kind of fun to show off once I get it in hand. But regardless, I just felt like I got a good price for what it was that I was getting here and what I was looking for. And I was happy with it. Now, let me compare this to another autograph out of 5 from Select, and we'll do a little comparison in terms of where that one goes. Okay, now here, I'm using TerraPeak in order to pull up some completed auctions, and specifically, I grabbed this one. This is a Select. It is a gold autograph, Joe Montana, and this one is actually numbered to 5 as well. So it's a gold Prism Auto from 2020 Panini Select. Nice looking card. You can check it out right there. You're going to have a lot of shine there with a nice gold prism. Autograph out of 5 in Select. Now, this is a fully licensed card, but I want you to take a look at it. Look at the image of Joe Montana there throwing the football. Well, if you look at the helmet, effectively he's looking kind of in your general direction and the uniform. So kind of based on the tilt of the uniform and the fact that he's kind of looking directly at you, outside of the fact that you can see San Francisco 49ers at the bottom above his name, here's what you got. You got an autograph out of 5, and it's a sticker autograph out of 5 from a fully licensed product of Joe Montana. And what's funny about this, the reason why I included this comparison is this is as apples to apples as I can make it. It's a situation where, you know, looking at the image in and of itself, you can't see the logo. You do have, and like I said, Panini and Select are fully licensed. You do see San Francisco 49ers at the bottom, so that distinguishes it. But they're both sticker autographs. They're both numbered to 5 of Joe Montana. So how much did this one go for? This one actually sold fairly recently. Let me minimize this. And the Joe Montana out of 5 Select autograph is this one right here. And it's sold in auction for $276. It sold on August the 6th. So 3 days ago. I got 30 bids on it. Good solid price. $276 for Joe Montana autograph. It's not too bad. But yeah, it was $276. And as I said, I was able to purchase the out of 5, you know, unlicensed sticker autograph, Joe Montana, for $40. So you can see a $236 difference as far as that's concerned. Now, again, I'm going to go back to what I said a little bit earlier. My goal here is not to pitch you an unlicensed. What I can say, though, where I do agree with Brian Gray, is that it does offer them a certain amount of flexibility to come up with some interesting concepts. And in the past, I've also shared with you on the hockey side and other memorabilia side, President's Choice Cards produces some very nice cards with some nice memorabilia, one-of-ones and things like that. It is going to be more collector-oriented because the general populace despite what Brian Gray said, he gave his little example about the growth of the unlicensed segment based on his experience. Well, you're starting off from a much smaller base. So you can say that you have much bigger growth, and that might be totally true. But he used the analogy of a $1,200 stock versus $5 stock. Well, $1,200 stock going from $1,200 to $1,400 is a much smaller difference percentage-wise than a $5 stock going to 10. A $5 stock going to 10 doubled, and a $1,200 stock going to $1,400 is a smaller increase percentage-wise. So it's a bit of a misleading statistic. In order for that to be equivalent, the $1,200 stock would have to go to $2,400. It would have to double. And that's a little bit tougher in comparison to the $5. However, the general premise is reasonable. It's one of those situations where you can look at different opportunities. And here in the same screen, also August the 6th, 2011 Topps 5-star Rainbow on-card autograph, 12 out of 15. Now on this one, you can actually see the San Francisco 49ers logo a little bit. So it wasn't a good apples to apples comparison. And this one's on card. So this is a situation where actually value-wise, even though it's out of 5 versus out of 15, I would slightly prefer this card compared to the select card in this example. Because as I said, you are seeing the logo a little bit here if that's something you care about. This is an on-card auto, which is cool. It is numbered out of 15 as opposed to out of 5. But this one you were able to get for $142, which I think is a really nice value for an on-card auto. The point really is that Joe Montana is a little bit undervalued in my opinion. But regardless, I was able to find a card that I thought was interesting for what I felt was like a reasonable price of a player that I thought, oh, this would be cool to have in the collection. So that's where I'll give credit, because Leaf provided me the opportunity to get it at a much more reasonable price point. If I was like a Joe Montana super collector, I would definitely want some of those on-card autos. I definitely would want some of those license cards. But for somebody who wanted a nice Joe Montana card, autograph card for the collection, just to have one, the Leaf offered a pretty good alternative. Now I'm going to share with you one more card here that's also in the Leaf unlicensed camp. An example from the wrestling genre, because I've talked about that at some length, and Leaf provides some interesting opportunities in that segment as well. All right, magic of editing, we're back. And this time we've got a Leaf Vibrance card, the Paladins subset with Hulk Hogan. So again, we got sticker auto. Again, same concept, same thing, you know, inside of the Leaf the One Touch with the Leaf sticker on it that a lot of you may be familiar with inside the product. And obviously you can see the Hulk Hogan doesn't have any logos or anything going on. He's pretty much just standing there in a shirt. That's probably not too far off. There's probably some logos maybe on the bandana or something usually, but this image could have been acquired at a variety of different places. But it's one of those things where this whole Paladins, and inside of this checklist, they've got a variety. I've seen Peyton Manning, I've seen Ric Flair, I've seen a variety of different ones. Leaf has been pretty good about a lot of the pop culture stuff. Wrestling-wise, they even have, like I said, in the past, I've talked about 2020 Leaf Wrestling, which has a lot of legendary folks in autographs available that might not be available in other avenues or might be a lot more expensive in other avenues. I've been able to get Bret Hart autograph that way through 2020 Leaf Wrestling, Kevin Nash, Chris Jericho, much cheaper than a lot of these other examples, including a couple that were on card. So it's one of those things where there are some opportunities. And even going back years earlier, Leaf had a wrestling set that was similar to a Gaudy design, and I have an Edge that was on-card autographed from back then. I want to say 2014 Leaf. I could be mistaken, but something in that vein. So this one here, I saw on eBay, and it was a buy it now best offer, and the seller came back and offered to bring it down. I want to say right about $100. I had actually seen another one of these, and this card is also numbered to 5. I actually saw a comparable on Terapeak that sold not long ago of the same out of 5, different number, but the same out of 5. I think it was for 150. Now, I don't know necessarily what I'm going to do with it. I just felt like it was a good value at that price point, and that's the reason I bought it. I'm quite content to hang on to it. No issue there. It's a Hulk Hogan card for the PC. I was looking to potentially add one anyway, so it's a situation where I got one for a fairly reasonable price. But obviously, you can go the select route. You can go the Prism route because they've got Panini has the WWE license, and there are Hulk Hogan autographs in there. So it's one of those situations where you've got options here. You don't have to go this route. You can go the Panini license route, and they've got some very nice cards there available to you, but you are probably going to pay more. You're going to pay, in some cases, significantly more because you are paying a premium. The bottom line is that Leaf does have the opportunity and the ability, as long as they can get signatures from these celebrities or athletes or whatever the case may be, to create a lot of different and unique cards. So for that portion of Brian Gray's, breakdown, he is correct. And I've talked about in the past on the live stream, we've talked about the whole Pete Weber card with the meme inscription and everything, which is a lot of fun. It's one of those cards that's a lot of fun for folks to have some enjoyment in. And if you don't take it too seriously as a collector, you can definitely have your fun with it. It's one of those things where you kind of have to figure out, what is it that you're trying to do as a collector? What is it your desired goal as a collector? What is it you want to achieve? and then look at what products are available for you accordingly. The bottom line, though, is that companies like Leaf being there does provide a nice alternative. It can create a fun, different variation, or it can create a little variety in a collection of stuff that you can collect otherwise. There's no reason why you can't collect licensed and unlicensed versions to have a nice little contrast. And it can create some value there to make things a little bit interesting or to spice up a collection in general. So that was kind of my main point that I wanted to make with that. So that's why overall I wanted to have this discussion and also play some clips from the Brian Gray discussion, because as I mentioned earlier, kind of bring it back around to the first story. I think with the Fanatics and Panini fight over what the future is going to look like, I think down the road we will see another version of some unlicensed stuff. So it's one of those things where it's good to get the discussion out now and think about this a little bit. And my goal, as I said earlier, is not to convince you, oh man, unlicensed is great. No, I think it can be good in the right circumstances. I think it can create for some fun cards. And I think if you're looking at it from a collector's prism, you're not necessarily looking at value per se. I think there's some opportunities there. Now, there might still be some value opportunities because, as I said, if there is an appreciation of cards like this, there's a possibility I could hang on to this for a while and maybe flip it and make a couple bucks on it. But it's not my primary reason for getting the card. I'm getting the card because I think it'd be fun to have one, and that I saw and I felt like I was getting a reasonable value on it comparative to some of the other alternatives available. And that's where the consumer has to make their own choice, because somebody who doesn't like unlicensed is never going to be interested in this, even at $1. Somebody else who's just a fan or just wants the card might see some value in it, and that's where everybody's got to figure out their own stance on where they go with it. So, with all that said, I wanted to leave it at that. Love to get any thoughts you might have about this, either story, one way or the other. It really makes no difference. More videos coming up on the channel. Live stream Friday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, where we'll talk about whatever. Now we're in the post-national section. On Friday, there will be a pickup video for One Card Mail Day, a nice 90s card that I was able to pick up and add to my Havre collection. So that's fun. Outside of that, we'll have more videos coming up as things come along, and we have some fun with the rest of the summer here in the sports card collecting world. With all that said, if you like the video, subscribe to the channel. Thanks very much, and we'll catch you in the next one.